Hey, what's going on? I'm Doug Cunnington, and welcome to The Doug Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk about using Google Analytics in the Search Console to tease out some data that some people have been asking about. And there's a couple listener questions as well, and they all sort of tie together, or at least I'm going to attempt to tie all this together. The specific questions are from Adil. And this one was mainly, it was posed as like, I'm losing traffic and how can I tell, what's happening? So he says he's losing traffic, he's losing impressions, they're declining. How can I find out like which keywords and which pages are impacted so I can create like an action plan? So good question there. And then Mark asks a question about, like why people publish so much content. And Mark's observation is that, the 80-20 rule applies to niche sites, and 2 to 3 posts are usually bringing in the majority of traffic, or at least a smaller percentage are bringing in the majority of the traffic. And Mark is saying, hey, I started like 8 weeks ago. I have, was it 8 weeks? Yeah, about 8 weeks ago, I have 12 posts published, and nothing is really popping. And in my estimation, I'm planning on publishing, 40 more articles. And since none of the first 12 have really shown themselves as the major traffic bringers in her, I don't know a better way to say that, but there's definitely one. But not one of the posts of the first 12 is like the main breadwinner. They're all like doing okay. So Mark is like, do we just have to, publish a ton of stuff and hope something works out? Or what can we do from there? So anyway, good question. Mark has a secondary question, which ties into the Search Console. And before we get into it, I'm going to tell you about a show that I like to watch. My wife and I got into this like reality show. It's not this typical kind though. So I think there are some parallels with like entrepreneurship too, or at least that is what I view. So anyway, there's a show on the History Channel called Alone. And if you're familiar with the show, shoot me an email. I'd be curious to hear. No spoilers. I'm not going to have any spoilers talking about it. There's about 6 seasons of this show Alone. It's on the History Channel, and it's basically a survival type show. So they drop off 10 people in a remote location. They're all separated. They're by themselves. They're close by, but they can't like reach each other. Usually there's some sort of natural barrier, like a ridge or a lake or a river or something, so they can't get to each other. They have 10 survival items that they could bring that they choose. There's some other like standard things, like I think they all get to bring a sleeping bag, and it doesn't count against them for one of their 10 items. But some examples of those items are like a fire starter, like a ferro rod is the specific term. They could bring like fish hooks, a bow and arrow, tarps, or some other sort of tent type structure, a knife or an axe or a multi-tool like a Leatherman or something like that. But they drop these people off, and basically it's like last person standing wins $500,000. And it's a very intense show. They have to film it themselves, so there's no like crew with them. They have a handful of cameras, and I believe what happens from a logistical standpoint is once a week, like a medical crew comes in. They make sure the person is, not dying, right? Because everyone ends up in some sort of starvation mode. They can catch a little bit of food or do some trapping or eat some, herbs and vegetables and roots or whatever that they could find out there. But anyway, the point is a medical crew comes in, they make sure the person's okay medically. And I believe they give them like more batteries and memory cards. Cause I always wondered about that. They have all this camera gear, and then they have to film it. And I'm like, how do they keep the batteries charged? But once a week, I think they get fresh batteries, memory cards, all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's an interesting show. There's a lot of personalities. There's, a kind of person, I guess, that tries to get on a reality show. And these are like not the standard like LA Hollywood type folks that are just like, I'll do anything to get on camera. These are like survival people. They at least enjoy being outdoors, or else they're not going to last at all. So everyone usually has some skills and some chops in that area. The thing I love about the show is how people have to be flexible and adapt. And I think that is, kind of where I draw the parallel with entrepreneurship and like niche sites and like doing stuff where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work. And I may be wasting some time working on this project. So for example, someone on a loan might be trying to fish and they might not be able to catch any fish in a certain area using a certain method. So they have to figure out how to catch fish using like whatever they have at their disposal, which, maybe it's fish hooks and like fishing line, but they still can't catch fish. So they have to figure out a different way to do it. So it's very interesting how some people can adapt, some people, push through and, brute force their way into another solution. Or, like I said, some people end up in some sort of like starvation mode, and at some point they have to tap because they're just so hungry. The other part is they are alone, right? So they're by themselves 24/7, except for that medical check, which is like once a week or so. And I think it's like a straight up medical check, right? They're not doing any socializing or anything like that. So from a psychological standpoint, they are like alone. And if you're a really social person and you like to be around people, like it would be crazy. And I mean, I don't personally need to be around people all that much, kind of like solitude quite a bit. However, I have a dog next to me almost all the time. And I have basically for the last like 12 or 15 years, it's been a while, many years, I've had a dog. So it's rarely when I'm alone, very rare. There was a 6-month period between dogs before we adopted a new rescue, and between like when our other dog Brody passed away. So anyway, being alone would be extremely challenging. So I don't need to be around people much, but I also know that like not being around anyone at all would probably freak me out a little bit. So that is a whole other aspect. And it's an interesting show. Like I said, there's 6 seasons out there. History Channel, it's on Hulu as well, and that's where we watched many of the episodes. We're catching up on the last, most recent season, which is season 6, of course. So anyway, let me know if you watched that show. And the one other thing I'll add is, so you have the alone aspect. You have to be flexible and adapt as the conditions change, and you have to deal with harsh, cold conditions, or maybe rainy, or something goes wrong and you have to figure out a solution or a workaround. But there's also another set of people that they didn't reach their limit as far as figuring out how to live out there. They didn't hit like a wall where they couldn't get food and they couldn't figure out how to like eat, and they were going hungry. There's some folks that made just like little silly mistakes. Some are purely accidental. There were a couple people that maybe they tripped and slipped a little bit. Maybe they felt weak and that led to some carelessness, but they had, a broken bone or something like that. But there were a few people that have made like silly mistakes. So that usually is like just carelessness again. So someone cut their hand, right? They cut their hand pretty good, and they knew that they would require stitches. They had trouble like moving their hand a little bit. They were afraid maybe they hit a ligament and they didn't want to like lose movement permanently in their hand. So you can't make silly mistakes. Again, I draw a lot of parallels between entrepreneurship, because I think, there's an aspect where you have to be flexible. You have to iterate. You're going to have to try some things that you don't have enough information to know if it's going to work or not. You can't make, catastrophic, silly mistakes. It'll take you out of the game forever, right? Like cutting your hand and having to call in the medical team because you're like, well, obviously I cut my hand pretty bad, and, you shouldn't put the blade, any sort of blade towards yourself in any capacity. So anyway, I draw a lot of parallels. Good show. Check it out. Let me know if you watch it. One interesting thing as I go on these various, rambling stories that are not related to affiliate marketing is people email me and they're like, hey, I watched that show too, or I just read that book. And I'm a lurker. I've followed you, Doug, on Niche Site Project for a little while. But, that book is actually like a personal favorite. And I was like, I got to email you and let you know. And that's the first time I've ever heard from that person. So thanks. You probably know who you are because you listen to the show. 112263, Jake. So you know who you are. And so let me know. I dig that kind of stuff. So let's get to the questions here. I'm going to start off with Mark's question because it's at the top of my sheet. And Mark, as I mentioned before, sort of proposed the idea based on what he knows. And he's a beginner. He launched a site. He's about 8 weeks in at the time that he emailed me. And he's taken action, which is awesome. And he has heard from people that the majority of folks have sites that follow the 80-20. Just a few posts, a small percentage of the posts are bringing in the majority of the traffic. And I think that's likely on many, many sites. The interesting thing is that I think Mark is using the keyword golden ratio. And I just know from talking to people and then my sites where I've used the keyword golden ratio, the traffic distribution is different. It's typically spread across the long tail. And if you check out the graph of the long tail and what it means, if you just Google it, check out the images, the long tail goes on forever. And it's very small percentages. There's not a large quantity of like people that are visiting each one of those posts, but there's a lot of them. So anyway, my observation is that there are a few posts that get more traffic, but the percentage is so small. So instead of like one post getting, 10 to 20% of the traffic, and then there's like 5 or 6 others, and then the rest are sort of spread with a minute number or amount of traffic. I find that there's a couple posts that get like, 1%, and there's several of them that get about 1%. And then there are hundreds of others that are getting like a very small number. So the point I'm trying to make is it's not always the case, but Mark was wondering like, all right, so are people publishing a whole lot of content so they could figure out which ones are going to be the winners? And Mark's like, well, maybe you just have to do that to figure out which ones are going to be the winners. The idea with a keyword golden ratio is that, most of them are going to be small winners, and in aggregate, it adds up and that works out well. Now, the other part of the equation, actually, there's a few layers here. So one other part is you will likely start ranking for higher volume search phrases, right? Keyword phrases that are more competitive, that are not KGR. You will likely start ranking for those terms on posts that you intended to be a keyword golden ratio term. So that is a magical little thing that happens mainly if you publish content and then actually start getting backlinks. If you're not trying to promote your site, it will be a much slower process to actually get backlinks. You will probably get some backlinks if you're doing KGR content, but you will get way fewer than if you actually go out there and intentionally get backlinks. So the point that I want you to think about, Mark, is you may be okay. You may be okay. The other thing that we haven't even gotten to yet is you're only 8 weeks in. So your content is very young. You're still in the sandbox. And most likely you should just keep publishing. You should promote the site. You should keep moving forward. You're probably fine. You may find that like none of your posts are going to like really get a ton of traffic in the first 6 months. but there will probably be constant, steady growth. And if you could just keep growing, that's perfect. One thing we forget, we're in a hurry. I mean, I do the same thing. I'm like, I want the podcast to grow faster. I want to have more viewers on YouTube, and I want to, get more traffic to this monster post that I just published on Niche Site Project. And it just takes time. And sometimes you gotta go back and adapt things. And that'll be, the second part of your question, Mark. But the main conclusion that Mark was getting to is like, hey, I was going to try and publish like 40 articles, and I feel like none of them are really going to be big winners. And that honestly may be the case, Mark. I doubt it. If you do 40, my hunch is one or two of them are going to get way more traffic than you expect. So you don't know which one that's going to be. There are many variables, many factors. I've never even tried to figure out like how to identify like those ones that are going to really, really pop and be unexpected. I have no idea. So I guess maybe you're right. Maybe I do just publish a lot and then I let it like come together at the end. It seems to work out okay. I know it's worked out pretty well for a lot of other people as well. Quick transition. Mark was asking about revising a post. So this is where like you can iterate. So Mark says that I think he published some content before he discovered the KGR, and he was just targeting keywords, but he's gone back and figured out that there is a closely related keyword phrase that is keyword golden ratio compliant. And if you're completely unfamiliar with the KGR, there are a few episodes out there where I go over it. There are many videos on YouTube where I go over it. In essence, in short, it is a data-driven way to find keywords that are generally underserved on the internet. It's a manual way to do keyword research where you are running an advanced Google search command that gives you a little bit more data about the competition that's out there. So just check out the other episodes about the keyword golden ratio. And Mark, the answer to your question is yes. You can go back to those old posts and you can improve them. You can iterate on them. And part of that can be adjusting the title. I wouldn't mess with the URL. The URL is probably going to be okay as long as it's not like contradictory to whatever you're trying to change the title to match up with a KGR term. You may have to tweak the content a little bit so it's targeting and serving the searcher as well as you can get it. But yeah, that's a great approach. And one thing you can do as well is pull some data from the Search Console. So if you go to the Search Console, you can look at a particular URL and you can see what queries on Google are showing up as far as impressions and clicks and what position they show up on average over a given time period. So the Search Console is constantly being improved. They have updates. There's actually a pretty decent YouTube channel where they go over the updates. They try and keep you up to date. And if you just search for like Google Search Console, and it's like the official Google channel for that application. So anyway, you could check to see which queries, which keywords you're ranking for a particular URL. And in that case, you're able to like, I guess, just adapt your article with data that no one else has, right? It's in your Search Console. So you could see if you need to add a section on a particular topic because you're not covering it, but you're getting some impressions on the Search Console for that keyword phrase. And very straightforward to pull such a report. I'll probably make a video on it. It's impossible for me to try and describe it in words here, but it's a pretty simple report to pull. So if you filter on a specific URL, and then you're looking at the queries that show up, and you could kind of just look at the number of impressions that are out there and figure out from that point, is it worth it to spend time on that particular like keyword phrase or not? If it's completely unrelated, don't even worry about it. But there are going to be some where you're like, oh, that is a good topic to cover. Speaking of the Search Console, that brings me to the question from Adil. And I will most likely do a video on this one also. So that makes me think, hey, if there are questions that you have about the Search Console or Google Analytics, shoot me an email, feedback@doug.show. Adil is losing traffic on his site. Impressions are going down. So I know that he's looking at the Search Console to understand that. And typically, you should be able to, figure out exactly where the issues are. So here's what you can do. And number one, on the Search Console, which I know Adil is using it, you can basically filter on the position and the impressions, and you could compare it to the previous period, whatever that is. So you could take a look at, say, the last 30 days, for example, or last 3 months, and you can, figure out, Adil, where and when your traffic is, or when is the correct question. When your traffic started going down, you probably see that in analytics in the impressions. So start on that date, compare it to the previous period. If it happens to be a seasonal type niche, you may need to filter on that time period. And then instead of comparing it to the previous period of time, the previous interval, you can compare it to the previous year. If you compare it to the previous year, you remove the seasonality aspect because you're comparing this year to last year for the same exact dates. So anyway, if you do that for impressions, then you can sort it on impressions. Make sure nothing else is selected, only impressions, and then it'll show you the impressions for the current period, the 3 months, for example, versus the previous 3 months. And then you can sort it by the percentage which it's dropped. And then you can see, oh, it's those pages where I'm having an issue, or it's those queries, those keyword queries that are dropping. And you can see the exact number of impressions that have dropped in those 2 different periods. Additionally, you can select the clicks. Yeah, so it's clicks. And you can see even more specifically, like the people that are not clicking or whatever the percentage drop is. Again, you can sort it, and then you'll have your, main suspects there, and you could prioritize it that way. The ones where you've lost the most clicks, those are the ones you want to hit first. The other thing that you can do is select the position. The Search Console shows you the position as well. So again, you'll have to deselect the other options, only select the position, and then you can see, oh, this term used to rank, 1.2 on average for all the impressions, and now it's ranking number 3. So you can see it's dropped 2 positions. Again, you can sort it, and it's very easy to see where you're dropping. All right, so that's how you would do it on the Search Console, valuable data. On Google Analytics, you can do a similar thing. Now, you don't have any visibility for the keywords. You used to have that visibility, but Google removed it. So we don't have that anymore, but you can get similar information from the Search Console. So not a huge deal. In Google Analytics, what you can do is go, I think it's the behavior section, and then you look at the site content and then all pages. And in the same way, you can look at the period starting where the traffic dropped. So whatever date that is. For example, I've been looking and filtering on different dates when Google updates came out. So I'm recording this in November of 2019, and there was a Google update that rolled out and impacted people on November 8th of 2019. So I'll go to Google Analytics, go to behavior, go to site content, all pages. Then I'll select the date that I'm looking for, starting on November 8th to the current date, and then I'll compare it to the previous period. And I could see that for some sites, traffic has dropped a little bit. For other sites, luckily for me, for most of the sites that I have, and yeah, basically most of the sites that I have and that I'm working on have seen an increase in traffic. The biggest increase, funny enough, is on the age site case study. So kind of cool because it's just a little more growth than I expected. And you can see on the date, November 8th, traffic started climbing. So anyway, you can filter the dates as you need it based on, whenever your traffic decline started, Adil, and then compare it to the previous period. Same deal as the Search Console. You can compare it to the previous year if you happen to be in a seasonal niche where you want to remove that seasonality. So couple quick little tips there. And that's definitely one of those things where there's so much power in those two free tools, the Google Search Console and Google Analytics. It's pretty ubiquitous. People are mostly use those tools for their analytics. And I know some other folks are I use Clicky or some other thing. I think that's what it's called. And, that's fine if you want to use another tool. For me, it's easy enough to just set up Google Analytics, and that's sort of the trusted one out there. If I want to sell a site or if I want to buy a site, Google Analytics is kind of what everyone wants to work with. So other places, places and people, brokers will accept Clicky or other areas or other tools to get the analytics. But anyway, they're very powerful tools, and there's so much data in there. There's so many different ways that you can look at the information, and there's just so many places to click. It's hard to tell what's important. And I never took a course or anything. I just kind of tried to figure out a handful of things. I've set up some sales funnel tracking. I don't know if it worked 100% the way I was implementing it with a specific tool. And a quick callback to a previous episode, when I was working on this course, one of my first courses, I used something called S2 Member, and it's a fairly technical tool if you're going to do anything complicated. I guess you could make anything complicated, but if we were just doing a really simple membership site with no funnel, no weird offer kind of things, it would have been fine. If we were just trying to deliver a course and put up a paywall, it would have been all right. But we were trying to build a funnel, and we were trying to have a one-time offer that someone could buy, but only right after they purchased the first item. All those sort of sophisticated things that you see out there with the super slick marketers, which I think I'm just a junior marketer myself. So mine's more straightforward. I'm not trying to sell you 40 things right after you enroll in my course. I'm not hey, do you also want to get this other thing that's $400 or whatever? I don't do that. So, and it gets complicated. So anyway, the point is I tried to set up some funnel analytics, and I think it kind of worked, but we never really made it pop, I guess. So anyway, those two tools are fantastic. And as you're trying to figure stuff out, well, shoot me an email because they're good videos to make. But the other part is, most of the time, while the documentation is dry from Google, it's usually pretty accurate for most of the products out there. I will contradict myself immediately after making that statement and let you know that the Search Console specifically has had a lot of updates in the last year or so. And I think, not always, but I think a couple times the documentation lagged a little bit, and maybe it wasn't 100% up to date because maybe they changed some of their production functionality and then they didn't update the documentation. But generally, for existing things, the documentation is very good from Google. A lot of times you can find someone who has like illustrated how to do a certain thing if you search for it. So anyway, that also means I can do videos on that kind of stuff because people need to know how to track and do things with the Search Console. Again, ton of data. It's proprietary. It's for you from your site, and no one else can get that data. Other people can like look at a tool like SEMrush or Ahrefs and see what keywords you're ranking for and reverse engineer some stuff. That's pretty powerful. That's pretty powerful. It's even more powerful to have the Search Console data because no one else has it, and it's free, and you probably already have it set up on your site anyway. So there's no reason not to use it. To tie together the two questions from Mark and Adil even more, when you pull those reports from the Search Console, like I said, you'll have the search queries, which that's the keyword phrase. And what you can do is basically like look at the keywords and figure out if you can add some content onto your site based on that information. So one of the great things that I had been doing for a while and that you could kind of use in conjunction with this information from the Search Console about the keyword queries that are bringing impressions and clicks to your site, you can look at an FAQ section or look to add an FAQ section to your site. And this is one of the best content improvement methods. So, if people are wanting to like reinvigorate their site, maybe like Adil, your traffic's dropping a little bit and you're like, oh, I need to do something. Like I've just been not improving my content. One thing you can do is check out the FAQ method. There are a few pieces of content online where I've talked about this before, but the FAQ method is basically like finding frequently asked questions that people ask about the specific topic that you're covering. And luckily, these days, you could just Google the term and there's a featured box where there are related questions or what do they call them? Common questions. I forget off the top of my head, but it's usually up near the top and you'll see 3 or 4 questions listed. When you click on it, it'll give you a short answer. It'll give you the reference as well, so you know where to do your research. And then it'll show you a few more questions because you're like engaging with that frequently asked questions box. So Google shows you and tells you what the frequent questions are, and then they tell you the answer. So it's fairly straightforward these days to figure out frequently asked questions. In fact, you could hire a VA to do it and just, hey, come up with 50 common questions about this topic, and maybe only 25 of them are going to be good. Maybe a few of them are redundant. Maybe you can give your VA instructions on like how to prune the list if you end up with a few redundant ones or ones that are, totally irrelevant. But basically, if you come up with those list of questions, you can add that content to your post. And again, you could tie it together with the queries that you see. Maybe people are asking, maybe it's related to one of the questions. So it's not something where you can throw it into a tool and just have it spit out the answer. It's also something where there's nuance. So if you just give it to a VA who doesn't know what you're trying to do, it may be a little bit difficult for them to marry up the two lists and figure out like the common ground. But if you're listening to this, if you've made it this deep into the episode, then you probably would be able to look at the two lists and figure out the common ground and then really like optimize around those keywords that are not only frequently asked questions, but they are related to things that you're already getting impressions, potentially clicks for. So you may also be able to show up in that frequently asked questions snippet area, that featured snippet. So just a little tip, like tying it all together. And this is getting deep into sort of like more technical type SEO. This is like 2.0 stuff where you're going to improve and iterate on content that's already out there, which is a very good idea. I recently have gone through this with Niche Site Project, and I'm about to start a little project that I won't share anything about until I have a little more data, but it'll end up being a pretty good overhaul on a piece of content on my site that I used to rank pretty good for, and then I've dropped over time. And there, that just happens as content goes out of date because things change and it needs to be updated. And there's other content where people have, gone and done better research. They've written a better post than I did. And now I have to go and catch up to where I was. And hopefully I'll be able to, get back to where I was for these terms. But anyway, I'm using some of the same methods that I'm talking about here, plus a couple others. But, once I execute on it, I think we'll have some interesting stories to tell. Hopefully, like I said, I'll get back to where I want to be with a few of these posts that used to be ranking pretty well for a handful of terms that brought in what I believe is pretty meaningful traffic for Niche Site Project. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm actually recording this in the evening time frame, which is unusual for me. My wife's out of town. Georgie and I were just sitting around, and I was like, you know what? I kind of have a little more energy than I expected. I'm not sure why. Usually at this point in the evening, I'm very sleepy. It's after 9 o'clock. I'm a pretty early riser, and therefore I go to bed pretty early too. And yeah, I'm up past my bedtime. It's quiet in here. Georgie hasn't barked or anything. Fingers crossed. So anyway, if you have a question, feedback@doug.show. There is also a voicemail number. And at this point, as long as you leave a solid question, probably going to end up on the show. Quick plug for one of my favorite podcasts, Tropical MBA. If you have not heard that show, it's awesome. It's one of the ones that I still listen to, that I started listening to in 2013 when I was like trying to, learn more about online business and lifestyle design and all that kind of stuff. You should check out this episode because I was featured on that show. I sent in a voicemail based on one of the previous episodes and asked a question, and they played it on the air. So I sort of figured out how to get on that show by sending in a voicemail, and you could do the same thing on this show. So anyway, I will put a link in the show notes for the show. It's I believe it's tropicalmba.com/RV. So that you may not be interested in the topic, but I'm on there for a minute or so. Got a little shout out. So I appreciate that. And if you go check out the show, let me know. Leave them a comment. Let them know that you liked hearing me on the show as well. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I'm just rambling here. You guys are at the gym or in your car or something. So I'm in a jet. Have a good day. We'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for listening to The Doug Show. I really do appreciate it. I mean, I'm just sitting here at my computer recording stuff, and you're listening to it, and I think that's awesome. If you enjoy the show and you know someone who maybe would be interested in it, please let them know. I think it would be fantastic if you help spread the word. If you are not signed up for the Niche Site Project email list, well, you're in luck. All you have to do is go to nichesiteproject.com, click the green button, enter your name and email address, and I'll send you a bunch of cool stuff about affiliate marketing, productivity, including all my templates. If you happen to not be subscribed to this podcast, please do subscribe, and don't forget, I welcome your questions. So you could send your emails to feedback@doug.show. I got that really cool domain, doug.show. That's it. So feedback@doug.show. Or I'm going to leave my voicemail number in the show notes. So all you have to do is give me a buzz, leave a voicemail, and then I'll potentially put you on the air. So looking forward to it, and we'll catch you next time.